Moving from the heart over to the pancreas now. Hippocrates, the father of medicine, 400 years BC, no mention of diabetes in his writings. So diabetes is a fairly modern disease. Diabetes is a lifestyle disease. Newton's third law of motion states that to every action there's an equal and an opposite reaction. Why isn't the pancreas working? That's what we should be asking. As Proverbs 26 verse 2 states, the curse causeless shall not come. There is a reason. There is a reason why pancreases are not working. Now the pancreas's, one of its main roles is to release two hormones. One is insulin, that gets the blood sugar down. The other hormone is glucagon, and that gets the blood sugar level up. Now the meal that you had tonight, because it's high in fibre, I think everything had fibre, generous proteins, there's your legumes and some great fats, it gives a slow, sure, steady release of glucose, of nutrients. And that allows the pancreas to just release the insulin as it's needed. That's what every cell in the body wants, and that's what our pancreas wants. But what's happening today is people predominantly are eating a high carbohydrate diet. And this high carbohydrate diet releases a lot of glucose. And that glucose, when it gets into the blood, especially the refined sugar, and by the way, the refined grains, it's almost as high as sugar. But there is one grain that gets the blood sugar levels higher than refined sugar. Is that a surprise? And the grain that does that is what? Bread and cereal and pasta and cakes, etc., and pizza are all made out of predominantly one grain. What's that one grain? It's wheat. Now in the 1950s, wheat went through intensive crossbreeding. And the reason they put it through intensive crossbreeding is they wanted to create a plant with a high yield of grain, so that would help with the starvation crisis in Africa, in Mexico, in India. And eventually Dr. Norman Boulay got a Nobel Prize for his hybridized wheat. At first, the stalk broke before the grain was fully ripe, because wheat used to grow that high. Do you remember that? We had a 25-year-old wheat farmer come to our retreat. He'd never heard of such a thing. He didn't know that wheat used to grow that high. And so they went back to the drawing board and they came up with a wheat that only grows this high. I was in Holland, probably a month ago now, and we're driving along. You know, it's very, very flat. And I saw big fields of sandy-coloured grass. I said, what is it? It's everywhere. They said, it's wheat. It was only that high. So it had only to be that high with a thick stem, because some wheats are producing 8 to 10 times the grain that they originally produced. So in the 1970s, the wheat started to go worldwide. So by the 1990s, every bread, cereal, pasta, cake, etc., pizza, all made out of this hybridized wheat. It was rushed through with no safety studies. They didn't think they had to do safety studies on wheat. It was rushed through with no safety studies. It sounds like the COVID vaccine, doesn't it? Rushed through with no safety studies. And who's it experimented on? I'm not interested in being experimented on. I'm interested in experimenting whether exercise works. I'm interested in experimenting whether drinking more water works or going to bed earlier works, because if it doesn't work, I've lost nothing. They're the only things I'm interested in experimenting on. But I've found that they work. But what it produced, and they're starting to realise this only now, what it produced was a type of starch structure that gets the blood sugar level up higher than even sugar. So the starch structure that was created is called amylopectin A. And amylopectin A is the name of the starch that was produced. So let's look at what it does. We'll do it up here. It gets the blood sugar level up very high, very fast. So then you get a corresponding dump. So that's the A. So let me give you something to compare it to. Amylopectin B. Amylopectin B is found in bananas and potatoes. And if you're familiar with the glycemic index of food, bananas and potatoes, they're high on the glycemic index, so they get the blood sugar level up relatively high, relatively fast. Not as high and not as fast, so it's more like that. So that's your B. Amylopectin C is found in all your beans. There's your lentils, chickpeas, lima beans, cannellini beans, kidney beans. So what does the C do? The C gives a lovely steady rise, maintenance, lovely steady drop. That's what every cell in the body wants. So let's have a look at it on the glycemic index. Now the glycemic index is a very important index for diabetics because the glycemic index is an index or a reading on how quickly the glucose in that food is released into the blood. So your baseline is 55. So all your berries sit at about 26. Grapefruit, it sits at 25. So for the diabetic, these are good fruits because they're low GI. They're a lovely, slower delivery of fuel. Whereas bananas, they sit up here somewhere. So where does sugar sit? Sugar sits at 59. Where does white bread, white pasta, white cereal, it sits at 69 because of the amylopectin starch in it. What about whole wheat? Whole wheat bread, whole wheat cereal, it sits at 72. How could that be? Well, because the whole wheat isn't refined, it's got more amylopectin A in it. And it's the amylopectin A that gets the blood sugar level up. Now, absolutely, whole wheat bread is superior to white because it's got fibre, it's got your B vitamins. But in regard to the diabetic, who's watching their blood glucose levels, they need to eliminate wheat. Totally. I had one lady start to cry when she saw this. I said, "Why are you crying?" She said, "I'm a diabetic. I'm type 2 diabetic." She said, "I was diagnosed 2 years ago. I do everything they tell me. I eat wholemeal bread, wholemeal pasta, wholemeal cereal." And she said, "And every 6 months I go to the doctor and he puts me on more insulin." She said, "I'm not like the lady down the road. She just eats cakes and candies but I don't do that." She said, "I'm crying because I've been so frustrated, but I have not known what to do." So why aren't the nutritionists told this? How much wheat does America grow? Acres of it. How much wheat does Australia grow? A lot. So it's big industry. So it's not an easy thing to change. And the farmers love the hybridised wheat. They've got to pay their bills. 10 times more grain per acre, that's 10 times more dollars per acre. So you see the problem. So no wonder diabetes has skyrocketed. It's not just the sugar, it's also the wheat. So to conquer diabetes, what do? To conquer diabetes, go for the low glycemic index foods. It's not easy. It's easy. I meant to say it's not hard to get a glycemic index. You can Google that. It's a matter of having berries for breakfast instead of banana. It's as simple as having sweet potato instead of potato. Having your whole grains, eliminating the wheat. Low GI foods. Number 2, daily legumes. I met a man, he was a scientist, he was 69. He came to our retreat. He said, when I was 42, I was told I had pre-diabetes and to eat legumes every day. He said, I eat legumes every day and I never got diabetes. Because the beans give that lovely, sure, steady delivery of fuel. But how do we stop them causing bloating or wind? You soak them overnight. And then you rinse them very well. And then you bring them to the boil. Have you seen all the froth that comes on? You know what that is? Wind. You got to rinse it away. What I do is when my beans are 3/4 cooked, I rinse them again. And then I put my beans into a delicious sauce. And then you will not have that problem. They'll be a lot easier to digest. When I first married my husband 24 years ago, he could handle lima beans, he could handle red lentils, he could not handle brown lentils, and he could not handle kidney beans. So what I did is at the meal I'd give him a teaspoon. That didn't cause a problem. A few days later, 2 teaspoons. Within a couple of weeks, 3 teaspoons. He can now handle them all. So sometimes if there are some you can't handle and they're even well soaked and rinsed, just start slowly and introduce yourself to them. As we looked at when we looked at the liver, the legumes are only 1/3 the carbohydrate that you will find in your grains. Number 3, there are some things that must stop. What must stop is wheat. What must stop is refined sugar. Now, if someone's looking at conquering diabetes, initially they also need to eliminate all your healthy sugars, like your palm sugar, your maple syrup and honey. So they need to be stopped until the pancreas is starting to recover. And it can recover. One young man named Dan did our program. He was type 1 diabetes. He got diabetes after a strong course of antibiotics at the age of 15. He's now 19. He said, my specialist said my pancreas is dead. I said, is it gangrene? What's dead? I said, if there is blood going through your pancreas, it's not dead. The life of the flesh is in the blood. So he began to do this. Another thing is no wheat, no caffeine, and no refined sugar and no caffeine. Caffeine can actually get an insulin response, so that has to be stopped. When he came to our retreat, he ate only low glycemic foods. He had legumes every meal. He started to drink more water, hydration. And what he found was if he felt that he was getting a blood sugar level low between meals, he'd have a little bit of the salt and a glass of water and it would maintain him. I do not advise diabetics eat every 2 hours because that really disrupts digestion. When we looked at the journey through the gut, did you notice that digestion averages 3.5 to 4 hours? So you've got to leave that break between meals. If you eat food, and this is what Dan did, And we just looked at this. High fibre. Remember what fibre does? It slowly releases the glucose. Generous proteins, there's your legumes, nuts and seeds. They're all low carbohydrates, so you're not overworking the pancreas. And also the healthy fats. We also looked earlier in the week at fats that heal, fats that kill. And the killer fats are your altered fats. There's your deep fried foods, there's your margarines, those fats that have been changed or altered, or your polyunsaturated fats that have been extracted using high heat. They're the dangerous fats. These are the three foods that keep the food in the stomach longer. These are the ones that give that steady, consistent delivery of fuel. Also, what Dan did is he began to exercise. And the exercise he implemented was the high-intensity interval training. So he'd put his joggers on every morning and he would run up and down the hills. Now after, he was with us for 4 weeks. He did 2 weeks program and 2 weeks in the garden. And he came to me at the end of the 3rd week and he said, I want to tell you something. He said, the first week, if I got a blood sugar level low in the middle of the night, I had some candies in my bag, I'd just take a candy. He said it'd get the blood sugar level up, but he said I'd get a terrible headache. But it got my blood sugar level up. He said the second week, I was feeling a bit guilty that I shouldn't be doing that. So he said, if I got a blood sugar level low in the middle of the night, I'd eat an apple. It takes a long time to eat an apple in the middle of the night, doesn't it? The 3rd week, he did something else. He said the 3rd week, if he got a blood sugar level low, he'd jump on the floor and do 30 push-ups. So what's he doing there? Do you remember in our last presentation looking at the heart, about the stores that we have in the cell? Remember the 20-step pathway that gives us 2 units of energy. There's the 8-step pathway that gives us 36. Of course, that's the oxygen pathway. But remember the little bunch of grapes, the little glycogen stores, already in your muscle cell. So when Dan did 30 push-ups, it caused a release of these glycogen stores that gave him energy, got the blood sugar level up. He said to me, why didn't anyone tell me about glycogen? I believe glycogen is the diabetic's best kept secret. It's already in there. And if you run out of that, what else have you got? You're fat. That's right. He told me that one morning he got up. I have to give you Australian levels. I don't know if yours are similar. I don't think they are. So the blood sugar level should sit at about anywhere between 5 and 6. So he got up one morning and his blood glucose levels were 3. So what he did was he had the salt, water, got dressed, had another salt, more water, went for a run, came back, tested his blood glucose levels, they were 9. And he'd had nothing to eat. Where did that come from? Came from the stores, the glycogen stores and the fat stores. If you're running out of glycogen, it's an amazing process. That's why exercise is vital. Not only that, what happens when you exercise and you're doing the high intensity? Your cells screaming out for fuel. So what happens is extra insulin receptor sites develop on the membrane around the cell so that it can take more glucose in. That's quite incredible, isn't it? Now, before someone develops diabetes, they usually start with insulin resistance. You've heard of insulin resistance. What happens with insulin resistance? the person's, say, on a high carbohydrate diet, a lot of wheat, blood glucose levels are going high. Pancreas gets screamed at. You see, high glucose demands high insulin. So when blood glucose levels are high, the pancreas is getting screamed at, quick, insulin, more insulin. So it releases a lot of insulin, too much insulin actually. So what happens now? Goes too low. So down there, the brain says to the pancreas, stop the insulin, release the glucagon. But what does the person also do down there? Has a candy, has a Coke, has a coffee with 3 teaspoons of sugar. What does that do? Whoa, up it goes again. Now too high. Stop the glucagon, release the insulin. Oh no, stop the... Can you see what's happening? The pancreas is just wearing out. I'm against child abuse, I'm against animal abuse, and I'm against pancreatic abuse. But many, that'd be like someone kicking their dog, not realising it's hurting the dog. But it's actually not that clear because we can't even see the pancreas. We don't know what's going on in there. And so many people don't realise, like this lady that started crying, she didn't know that they'd changed the wheat. She didn't know that it created that starch structure that gets it up even higher. Oof. One lady said, but we were always told whole wheat bread's really good bread. Can you get bread or can you eat bread? You can. You can. From the ancient grains. I'm going to give you a website. And this young man, it's his own business, www.simpleneeds. And he uses the ancient grains. He's in North Carolina. And he will shop or ship anywhere. And that is excellent bread. It's probably more expensive than other bread you've bought. But one slice of that bread is usually equal in nutritive value to a whole loaf of other breads. You can get wheat that has not been hybridised. There's your spelt and your kamut and your Enkenhorns. There are grains. They're called ancient grains. When my son was... I think he was 14, he got a job. He had to cycle 5 kilometres to a little Italian fruit and vegetable shop. In Australia, we have little fruit and vegetable shops. That's all they sell. So in all the little towns, you'll have a butcher shop, you'll have a baker shop, you have a fruit and veggie shop. And it was run by Italian family. There was Mama was about late 60s. There was Daughter was early 40s. And Mama would say to Peter, get that broccoli, put it out the front. So Peter would carry it out the front and he'd meet Daughter. And the daughter would say, Peter, what are you doing with that broccoli? Now get it back there. And if Peter tried to speak, he'd got into trouble because he's back answering, so he'd turn around and then he'd meet Mama. Peter, what are you doing that broccoli? I told you to get it. And Peter would turn around and hopefully eventually they'd meet. Peter would come home every day and he'd have a backpack full of rock melons or things that they were going to throw out. He'd come, he'd say, Mum, I got some good fruit today. After about 2 weeks, he said, Mum, can I get another job? It wasn't the 5 kilometres cycling. It wasn't the backpack full of goodies. It was these women. And isn't that what people are doing to their pancreas? Get it up. No, get it down. No, get it up. No, it just wears them out. And that's when insulin resistance happens. Insulin resistance is when so much glucose is coming in that these insulin receptor sites basically say, I'm sick of the sight of you. I don't want to even see you anymore. So what happens is the blood glucose levels remain high because it can't get into the cell because of insulin resistance, and the brain sees all the glucose in the blood and starts screaming at the pancreas, more insulin, more. Can you see what's happening? And the insulin just can't do it anymore. So it stops. Sometimes something can damage the beta cells in the pancreas, like Dan, when he had the strong course of antibiotics, it had damaged the pancreatic cells. So let me finish the story of Dan. So by the end of the 3rd week, Dan's insulin has gone from 90 units a day down to 10 units a day. Type 1 diabetic, 3 weeks. Why was he getting blood sugar level lows in the middle of the night? He was on too much insulin. I always leave it with the person because they take their blood sugar and adjust it accordingly. What had his specialist told him? His pancreas was dead. Well, the fact that he kept getting blood sugar level lows meant that his pancreas was starting to work, and now he's on too much insulin. So he backed off, until after 3 weeks he was only taking 10 units a day. That's quite incredible. He was diligent. He didn't want to even eat fruit. He said, I want to conquer this thing. He's only 19. He went home a very happy young man. But I want to tell you about Bobby. Bobby's story is remarkable. He's also type 1 diabetic. And he came to the retreat when we were in Alabama, and it was probably 5 years ago now, and he's 62, they wheeled him in a wheelchair. They'd recently taken the lymph nodes out of his groin to try and determine why he had diabetes. I don't quite understand that. But when he flew to us from Florida, being up in the plane, his legs had swollen because his lymph nodes were gone. That's why he was in a wheelchair. He's not usually in a wheelchair. He said, the doctors have told me last month they can do no more for me. He was on medication. He was on 90 units of insulin a day. That's short and long acting. He was on blood pressure, blood cholesterol, blood thinning. He said, I will not be able to exercise with the other guests. Look at my legs. I said, that's right. But I said, what I want you to do is every hour, I want you to get on the trampoline or the little mini rebounder and just go like this. Because that fluid is lymphatic fluid. And when you are on the rebound, it directly stimulates your lymphatic system. I said, every hour, just one minute like that. That's all you need to do. And I want you to walk barefoot on the grass to massage those feet. I said, I don't want you to go on the walks with the other guests, the legs. Within 24 hours, the legs had come down by half. He did the 2 days on juicing. Blood glucose levels were starting to come down. At the end of 2 weeks, now he was diligent in this to the point where he'd sit next to me and say, am I right? Have I got the right amount of fruit on this plate? He said to me, anything you tell me to do, I will do. So at the end of 2 weeks, he was down to 10 units of insulin a day. That's from 90 units of insulin, type 1 diabetic. Implementing this. He emailed me 3 months later, off all medication. Everything. And he said, and I've lost a lot of weight. I'm trying to think of it. I think it was about 40 pounds that he'd lost in those 3 months. When he got home, his 42-year-old wife said, this is your baby, I'm not interested. I like my champagne, croissants and coffee. He said, okay. Now, after 3 months, she's looking at her husband. He's lost all his weight. He is looking good. He's feeling fantastic. He's not the grumpy husband he used to be. See, when blood sugar levels drop down, that's when diabetics feel bad, feel impatient. His blood glucose levels were steady. I said, tell me what you're doing. Tell me your exercise. He said, I cycle 6 miles a day. I swim 30 laps a day. And I rebound 3 times a day. What are you prepared to put into this? This man was prepared to put this into it, and the results were incredible. Remember what his doctors had just told him? They basically sent him home to die, saying, we can do no more for you. He was a wealthy man, and he had the best specialists. He told me that he'd spent $1 million on his health in the last 10 years. And he met a little lady at the swimming pool one day, and they got talking, and she said, I think I know someone that can help you. And he came to our retreat. Anyway, the next email I got, he said, my wife's interested. She stopped her coffee, she stopped her croissants, and she's so happy because she has lost 15 pounds. And she's been wanting to lose weight. Why was she interested? Her husband didn't beat her over the head with everything. She just watched. She just watched. In fact, you know what they did after 6 months? They were remarried. He said, I just feel like my wife's got a new man. And she said, I have. And so they rededicated their life to each other. Just an incredible story. Every single case is different because there can be different factors that come together in every case. And I think Bobby's case is very interesting because his case would be considered quite extreme. Type 2 diabetic is a lot easier to conquer because the beta cells aren't as damaged as usually in type 1 diabetic. So we have many type 2 diabetic stories who have totally conquered it. But I like Dan's story and Bobby's story because they were type 1 and they were told that they would never conquer their diabetes. But they certainly did. So as you can see, we're actually getting close to those 8 laws again, aren't we? And I believe that it's very important every day to thank God for your pancreas, to thank God that He's given us a body that has the ability to heal itself. And if you don't heal in 3 months, thank God. And if you don't heal in 8 months, thank God, because you're getting there. The Bible says in 1 Thessalonians 5:18, in everything give thanks, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus concerning you. And then further down in that same chapter, and this is verse 21, it says, prove all things and hold fast to that which is good. Prove it. Try it for yourself. That's why I believe everybody should be their own doctor, because only you know how you feel, only you know what you've been through, and only you know how your body responds and reacts to what's happening. And that's why the best doctor will do this to you. Is that right? So don't be the doctor that won't listen. When your body speaks, listen. So our guests that have remarkable responses regarding diabetes, we feed them 2 meals a day. And what are most diabetics told to eat? Every 2 hours. Well, often the body doesn't know the difference between thirst and hunger. It's often thirst. And also, when you have that little bit of salt and that glass of water, and remember, at least 8 glasses a day. It's a lot harder to drink it in cold weather, so just sip it. I always have my bottle by me. I just sip, sip, sip. And it's amazing how much you can drink when you're sipping away. Are there any questions before we close? Yes? Stevia is probably the one sweetener that doesn't get an insulin response. Some people say, I don't like stevia, and I say, well, you've used too much, because if you overdo stevia, it gets a bitter aftertaste. So go a little less. It's hard to believe that such a small amount can sweeten. So start very, very slow. So that is one sweetener that can be used. But what you're better to do is veer away from the sweets at all. I find that when people stop this high carbohydrate diet, they say to me, I don't crave sweets anymore. The more sweet and the more wheat and the more sugar you eat, the more you will crave.
So in place of the wheat, what about sprouted barley breads?
Yeah, you could do this. I find the sprouted breads very heavy myself. And I like bread to be light and sweet. But I do know that some people love it and they cut it very thin and it's can be eaten that way. Some people go to more crackers, rye crackers, things like that. We've answered every question. That's great. Here's one. Yeah? Oh, we might take one up there, yeah?
Is there a good homeopathic alternative for high blood pressure medicine?
Is there a good alternative? I don't use homeopathy, but the hawthorn berry. We've seen many people get off their blood pressure medication by taking the hawthorn berry, and you can take 4,000 to 5,000 milligrams a day, and you can use the hawthorn berry even when a person's still on blood pressure meds. But as the blood pressure comes down, then because you've implemented all the lifestyle changes, then you can start reducing the blood pressure medication. Yes?
Can you explain the salt water thing again? Somehow I didn't catch that.
Okay. We lose a lot of salt every day and we need to take salt. And seawater is 92 minerals, but the salt you buy on the supermarket shelf is only 2 minerals. So it causes an imbalance in and out of the cell, which gets the pressure up. So we need to take mineral salt, which is your Celtic salt or the Himalayan salt. He actually didn't drink salt water. He took a little bit of the salt and then he drank the water. That's how you do it.
So I read a book and it said to do a half a teaspoon of the Celtic salt in 10 cups of water.
Half a teaspoon of Celtic salt. Sounds a bit extreme.
I think it was the water cure.
Okay, the water cure.
And I've been doing that for a long time.
You've been doing it, have you? Okay. How often a day do you do that? Twice? Oh, right. That sounds like a lot. Oh, I guess you watch what your body does with it. Yes?
Can you compare other grains like millet, quinoa, rice, buckwheat, oats with the wheat that has been genetically modified?
Well, the wheat's the only grain that has been genetically modified. Some rices have. That's why it's important to buy organic grains. Unfortunately, if you buy organic wheat, it has been grown organically, but it still has been through the hybridization process. So great alternatives is your ancient grains, but also your buckwheat, your millets, your rice. They're good grains.
I've heard garlic can regulate blood pressure. Is that true?
Yes, it can. It can be a contributing factor, especially if you're doing everything else right.
Okay.
But there's a lot of research being done on garlic, that is true.
Okay, thanks. What about corn? Can you talk about corn?
Corn. Unfortunately, in the US, most corn has been genetically modified. So if you can get organic, non-GMO corn, corn is great. Have you noticed in a lot of supermarkets they chop the top off the corn, the very tip of it? It's usually because it's gone mouldy. That's the problem. And have you ever bought corn and you see some of the little kernels at the top are pink? That's mould. So one of the problems with corn, and especially the dried corn, that as it dries, all the silk goes black. Well, that's mould. And every silk is connected to every kernel of corn. And Dr. Robert Young, in his book Sick and Tired, he's got a page and lists all the moles that they found in corn. So, you know, I do love corn, but please buy it fresh, buy it non-GMO, and then it's safe.
Barbara, could the use of Jerusalem artichokes be used to help, in a pinch, to help control people with insulin issues?
They can, but they would have to have everything else implemented. So we have seen incredible results just by the lifestyle changes. So Jerusalem artichokes could play a role, that's true.
So when you say hybridized wheat, is that GMO or is that something totally different?
It is different because they put the wheat through intensive crossbreeding, and this was in the 1950s. So this was a little bit before the genetically modified foods took off.
So you can't really find wheat now that's not hybridized.
Yes, you can. It's called Enkenhorn or spelt or kamut,
Okay, all the ancient.
the ancient grains.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
What about rice or quinoa?
Quinoa is very good. Rice is an excellent grain, but it must be cooked fresh every day. In 1921, Japan passed the Rice Act, putting stringent rules on the storage of cooked rice, because all through Asia there was an epidemic of cardiac beriberi, which was a heart disease, and they traced it to the mould on cooked rice. So rice moulds very easily, and when you see the mould has already been there, it's just to its reproductive stage. So rice should be brown rice, it should be very well cooked, and it should be cooked fresh every day. So once they implemented the Rice Act that put stringent rules, you could not keep rice more than 24 hours, had to be refrigerated. Cardiac beriberi stopped. Yes?
I was wondering about, with kamut or spelt, can we make bread out of it with yeast and it does as well as regular whole wheat? Or?
Yeah, absolutely, because it's the original wheat.
Oh, I see.
Enkenhorn is the wheat that God made.
Which was?
Enkenhorn.
What is that?
It's the original wheat. You can, I think it's an I there, Enkenhorn. Einkorn. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, I've also seen it written Einkorn and Einkenkorn, so there's a few.
Do we need to supplement vitamin D in the winter?
Vitamin D stores very well in the body, and compared to 100 years ago, people spend a lot more time indoors. So originally people didn't have to supplement because they spent so much time out of doors. So if you get adequate sun, you don't need to supplement. I've never taken vitamin D supplements, but I'm a gardener, so I'm outside a lot. I do recognise that some people may need vitamin D supplements, and there was a doctor who gave a presentation on COVID that said that he found that all his people that got COVID, all his patients with COVID, had vitamin D deficiency. So that makes it very attractive to have the vitamin D supplements. So I do acknowledge it may be necessary in some cases.
I was wondering if cooked grains are better for you than the raw cereals, even if you're getting the kamut and those type of grains in your cereal. Is it better to eat the cooked grains like the oats and the things like that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I was talking to Agatha Thrash many years ago when she was still alive, and she had read a statement by the health author Ellen White, who stressed long, slow cooking with grain. So she did some experiments. She would cook grain for so long, and she'd put it under the microscope, and if there were still starch granules, they lit up like almost little lights. And so she cooked many grains, and she found that it was only the long, slow cooking that broke down the starch granules. So raw oats are totally indigestible. So you are right, grains should have long, slow cooking. That's where your slow cookers are good, to put them in slow cookers overnight, wake up in the morning, it's cooked and ready to eat. So grains definitely need long, slow cooking to break down the starch granules. She said that those starch granules are about 6 times the size of a red blood cell. And a lot of postmortems that she did, she found little blockages and scars in many of the fine capillaries, and she believes it's because people don't cook their grains enough. But when she tried popcorn, all the starch granules were broken down. Waffles, all the starch granules are broken down. So in the browning process, like of the waffle, that speeds up the breakdown of the starch granules.
I had a question about the diabetes. I've heard of type 2 being reversed. That's not new to me, but type 1 completely new tonight. So my brother got it when he was 21, so he's had it 15 years. Is that to say that if he went on this program, he would have a high chance of reversing it?
Sorry, I didn't get all that. I think it's your accent. I'm used to Aussie accent.
Okay, my brother has had type 1 diabetes for about 15 years. He is 36. Mm-hmm. So my question was, is this program, would this work for him even though it's been that long of a time since he's had it?
I don't see why not, and it's worth a try. You've got nothing to lose.
Yeah. Okay.
We might make this the last question.
Back to the grains again and breaking down the starches. Would dextrizing the grain...
Yes. Dextrinizing helps, and that's why the browning process speeds it up. So what I sometimes do is I dextrinize rice in a dry pan, lightly toasted, and that certainly can cut down reduce the cooking time. So when you cook rice in a rice cooker, what you should do, so I think it cooks in about 20 minutes or half an hour. She found that the starch granules weren't fully broken down. So what you do, you cook your rice, but just leave the lid on for another hour. Because if you boil rice for an hour, it's not very nice. So you boil it until all the water's gone, and then you just leave it there. And that'll be like a little oven, and it will continue to cook for about another hour. And she found that broke the starch granules down. Okay, we'll pass over to our introducer, and she'll tell you all about tomorrow.
Okay. Did you enjoy that? Very good. Maybe you have seen the holiday and the Cooking with Judy cooking classes. The flyers for those are out there, and also they were in the lunchroom, so I hope that you've picked them up. There's also another seminar that has started online, and there's a flyer outside, Panorama of Prophecy. If you're interested in that, you can catch it online at amazingfacts.org. And today, as we entered into the Sabbath, we're reminded that although throughout the week we've talked about physical health, I think that every time in each presentation she has brought up that it's God that does the healing, right? And so we've reminded that we are made up of both physical as well as spiritual. And it is our connection to God that really brings the healing and the health. So as we are reminded of that today, may we also remember to rest. Rest in Him and rest physically. And shall we bow our heads for a word of prayer as we think of that? Father in heaven, we thank you so much for this Sabbath that we have entered into, where you remind us, Lord, that you are our source of strength, of health, and of healing. And I pray that you would help us during these Sabbath hours to be healed of the sin that so easily besets us, and that we may remember that Jesus is our Savior. We thank you for these meetings, and we ask that you help us to go with your blessing and to come back tomorrow morning at 9:30 to be able to learn more and also to draw closer to you. For as our prayer in Jesus' name, amen. So tomorrow morning, first presentation is at 9:30. Barbara will speak again at 11 o'clock, and then we will have lunch, and there's an afternoon meeting as well. Brian, do I have that correct? For the evening, same time? I don't see Brian. He's coordinated. But yeah, I don't see the... Okay, here we go. So we will keep with the same schedule, 6 and 7 for tomorrow night. Thank you, sorry. Oh, please remember to turn these in if you would like to be contacted for future seminars.